All right, good morning, and thank you everyone for joining us today here at the second leg of Business World Insights. My name is Tiago Arnaiz, and I'll be moderating today's discussion on the new normal, what to expect and how to prepare for the world we're entering into post-COVID-19. It seems like every day we're inundated with new developments in the race to find a vaccine or deeper insights into the nature of this virus. And with each of these developments come new projections and new changes in our response efforts. For business owners struggling to survive while also looking out for the well-being of their workforce, that can be a lot to keep up with. So our hope is for everyone to leave today's session with practical, actionable insights into how to better orient themselves and their firms amidst the current pandemic. We have a fantastic panel joining us today with representatives from the academic, the scientific, and business communities. So let's meet them all right now. First, we have Dr. Raul V. Dastura, Deputy Executive Director of the Philippine Genome Center at the University of the Philippines. We also have Dr. Nicole Corato, Associate Professor at the Center for Deliberative Democracy and Global Governance at the University of Canberra. Also joining us is Mr. Shailesh Baidwan, SB, the President of Voyager Innovations and Paymaya Philippines, and of course, Mr. Anthony Unjian, Managing Director and Senior Partner at the Boston Consulting Group. So let's begin by getting to know a little bit more about each of these speakers today and inviting them to share some quick insights to help frame today's discussion, after which we'll be diving into our conversation before opening the floor for questions from our audience. Kicking off today's session will be Dr. Raul V. Dastura, Deputy Executive Director of the Philippine Genome Center at the University of the Philippines. Dr. Dastura is a microbiologist and an infectious disease specialist. He took his bachelor's degree in microbiology at the University of Santo Tomas, and subsequently his medical degree and specialty in internal medicine at the De La Salle Health Sciences Institute. After this, he went to the University of the Philippines, Philippine General Hospital for his subspecialty training in infectious diseases, then received a research scholarship grant to the International Training Fellowship on Emerging Infectious Diseases at the Center for Global Health at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. He trained as a research fellow and collaborator in the Mid-Atlantic Regional Center for Excellence in Biodefense Research. Dr. Dastura, thank you so much for joining us today. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Arnaiz. For the past several months, the country has faced its share of the now globally declared pandemic of the coronavirus disease of 2019, or the COVID-19, brought about by the novel SARS coronavirus 2. And it has created significant mass hysteria and at some point has been polarizing environment in the country that clearly speaks about the importance of preparedness in responding to the global emerging infectious disease emergencies. For the last several months, our both private and government sector has exerted its effort in combating the disease by developing tools and programs that would allow control or flattening the curve model. The most significant impact that it did was the creation of the enhanced community quarantine that has slowed down the transmission of disease to allow our healthcare workers to be able to face the surge of cases coming into the emergency rooms and healthcare facilities. But the problem of the coronavirus will not disappear right away and would still be persisting for the next several months. The challenge here is when we lift the ECQ, what will be the new normal? Absolutely, it will not be the same as before, principally because the virus is still ever present in the country. Majority would still need, if all of us would still need to practice social distancing and wearing of personal protective equipment or face masks when we are outside, and at the same time devise new ways of running around our business while preventing us being together in specific places. And until we're actually able to develop the vaccine that will be able to control or improve the herd immunity, then the new normal will be a little bit different than what we used to enjoy. The things that are very important and crucial for the control of coronavirus infection is identification of active cases for effective contact tracing. And that would include more testings going on or around the country, allowing individuals to be identified at the early stages of disease so that their transmission dynamics will be shortened as opposed to persons undiagnosed spreading the virus with a transmission rates of 2:1. This particular intervention is very necessary and very important. The second issue here is the importance of continued consciously aware of being practicing social distancing, and especially when the ECQ is lifted, we still need to work on that insofar as controlling the transmission dynamics of the virus. Tiago.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Destura. So up next, we have Dr. Nicole Corato, an associate professor at the Center for Deliberative Democracy and Global Governance at the University of Canberra. Dr. Corato's latest book, Democracy in a Time of Misery, was published by Oxford University Press in 2019 and is this year's recipient of the Virginia Medelao Excellence in Research Award from the Philippine Social Science Council. She is the editor of the Duterte Reader, published by Ateneo de Manila University Press, and has written op-eds for various major publications. Dr. Corato has a BA in Sociology from the University of the Philippines, where she graduated cum laude, an MA in Sociology with distinction at the University of Manchester, and a PhD in Sociology from the University of Birmingham. Dr. Corato, thank you for joining us. Please.
Well, yes, thank you. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. And thank you to the organizers of this forum. My key message is the new normal is not really new. Instead, the new normal really just exacerbates already existing inequalities that we experience as Filipinos. Of course, I recognize that there will be changes with the way we live, but the way we experience these changes amplifies existing inequalities. For example, if the new normal means there should be physical distancing in public spaces, then this experience is different for people with cars and those waiting for the MRT, which now only takes, I think, 10 passengers per train car, and consequently making the queues even longer. The new normal will be extractive of our time, our health, our productivity, and our relationships. And the unfortunate, obvious truth is that the poor will bear the brunt of the new normal. The question is, how will the private sector respond? The experience of the new normal, I think, is also gendered. Working from home may be the new norm, but we also know that working from home is not always safe. We know that homes are sites of domestic inequalities. Recently, the United Nations called for urgent action as reports of domestic violence escalate globally. Work from home arrangements assume that the home is the safest space to protect our health. But we also know that's not true. For many, home is hell. What happens to workplace health and safety? But it's also important to talk about possibilities. The pandemic is a portal, as Arundhati Roy puts it in her widely shared op-ed. Pandemics and many forms of crises can be a time for bold ideas. And in this pandemic, we're seeing innovations in local government. So for example, Pasig City, the darling of the media, recently declared that LGBTQ families and their children are qualified for the city's social amelioration program. The pandemic also makes a strong case for investing in research on science, including social sciences, and maybe we can begin constructing a world where knowledge is valued. And I use the term constructing differently, constructing a world. The new normal is not a case of, okay, there's a pandemic, and then we wake up to a new normal tomorrow. The new normal is a product of a series of decisions. It is the culmination of what the government, the private sector, and the public do every day. And the new normal is yet to be determined. So I'll conclude my comments there.
Dr. Corrado, thank you very much for that. Our third speaker today is Mr. Shailesh Baidwan, SB, the President of Voyager Innovations in Paymaya, Philippines. SB is a seasoned business leader with more than 25 years of experience in management, operations, business development, sales, and marketing. He has held major management roles at American Express and Visa across the Asia-Pacific region. His most recent stint prior to joining Voyager in Paymaya was as president of the Insights and Loyalty Solutions Division at AMEA, which provided technology and marketing services for customer engagement for some of the most recognizable global brands. SB finished his Bachelor of Arts honors in economics at Delhi University and completed his MBA at India Institute of Management in Bangalore. SB, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Tiago, and to the other panel members. So, as has been highlighted right now, I think we are already living in the new normal. I think we all can agree that come the lifting of the ECQ, that is not going to be the end of the situation we are living in, and there will be ebbs and flows with this virus. So the question then is, from the industry where we are, which is digital financial services, how are we thinking about it? Now, from a perspective of fintech, we've always believed that digital financial services will become the new norm and will be the norm, and that is inevitable. I think what we are seeing right now is an acceleration in that journey happening both at the consumer level and at the enterprise level and across the enterprise, and I'll touch upon that in a second. So what we are finding is that for large businesses, we've always known that a digital strategy, whether it is for delivery of goods and services and in return for them to be able to collect for the delivered goods and services, is part of their roadmap. The challenge that is there is that some of them had that as part of their longer term roadmap of the next 2 years, and now that's getting compressed into becoming the top priority to be delivered in the next 2 months. And that's the challenge a number of them are facing, and we are working with a number of large enterprises to do that. And that challenge is also getting exacerbated even as we speak about the government sector. The government wants at one level to disperse funds to the most challenged segments of the society with the various social amelioration programs and other efforts. And at the other end, it needs to collect money from statutory contribution, taxes, fees, and all the rest. And recognizing that the digital channel is probably the most effective and probably the only way really to do this in the right way and to do it efficiently. So we are in conversation and working with the government sector across both areas to see how we can progress that and fast track that even more. Then if you go to the micro to the SME sector, a number of them are realizing that either it's a question of survival or in some cases it's actually throwing up opportunities where these businesses, by using hyperlocal locations, using access to Facebook, Viber groups, are actually able to use and service the communities with their products at a time like this. And they in turn are demanding digital financial services and payments so that they have certainty of cash flows when they do delivery of goods and services. And then, of course, not last but least, all of us as consumers have realized, I think, during this period, given all the challenges that have been placed on the physical infrastructure, that digital payments, digital financial services is essential to us just being able to go about our day-to-day lives, whether it is sending money, whether it is able to buy goods, services, and pay for them. And most important, to operate safely. I think we're already beginning to see the people and concerns with even handling currency notes and the likes of that. From our perspective, we have seen over the last few weeks a significant increase in the number of people who are downloading, let's say, our app, and they're using that app to send money to their loved ones in provinces, in different locations, because frankly, this is the only mode by which they're able to help and support their families. They're using it to buy telecom load and data. As you know, at this stage, when all of us are locked in, that's as precious as oxygen itself. And of course, they're paying for things like their bills and the likes of that. Now, depending on the business and the sector you are in, there are areas of massive challenge. And believe you me, we have our own set of challenges and deep ones at that. But I think moving along this path of digital financial services, digital delivery of goods and services, I think we all are realizing is not an option. I think the point is not do we move, but question is how quickly do we move and how fast do we get there? So let me conclude my remarks with that.
Thank you for that, SB. Our last speaker for today's session is Mr. Anthony Unjan, Managing Director and Senior Partner at the Boston Consulting Group. Mr. Unjan has over 20 years of consulting experience in Europe, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. He leads Boston Consulting Group's operations in the Philippines, as well as its technology, media, and telecommunication practice in Southeast Asia. He has extensive expertise in business strategy, large transformations, and new business builds, with a specific emphasis on digital advantage and customer journeys redesign. Mr. Unjan holds an engineer degree from the École Centrale Paris in France and an MBA from INSEAD. Mr. Unjan, thank you for joining us today. Please.
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity to talk about this topic. I think after each major crisis in history, there have been some shifts, some really meaningful changes at different levels. At the level of our daily life, of course, but also it stretched sometime at transforming some industries, creating new industries, or making some disappear. It also had some major societal impact. And if I take, for example, the World War II, it was a war where there was a big leap forward in terms of technology, unfortunately by necessity, and it was also a time where, fortunately, women took their fair place finally in the workforce, and then in many places got votes and so on. So I think some positive development in terms of society. Now, if we look at this specific crisis, I see personally two stages. One, new normal for the next few quarters, where we'll still live with a set of constraints related to this virus, and then a more structural, different world once this is behind us, things that will be lasting. And the longer will be this period, sorry, there is an helicopter. The longer will be this period of transition, the deeper will be the changes and the more different will be the new world. If I take the short term, of course, we're going to have to live with this social distance. We're going to have to live with the fear of the virus and probably some waves of, in some markets at least, some resurgence of the epidemic. And therefore, we do see people continue to exercise caution and impacting some of the way they shop, some of the way they engage, like we see right now at the moment. In the longer term, it's a bit more unpredictable, but we do believe that the set of changes that were on the way already are going to be amplified. And the main one was the one that SB was talking about, the digitalization of our life through the shopping, through the way we buy, through the way we interact. I think that will be a fundamental trend. And I think to come back to what Nicole was saying, in a way, this is also an opportunity to reset certain things. And I think the world in a way, we are facing what's happening, but we have also an opportunity to shape ourselves a different world in terms of amplifying some different ways of working, amplifying different ways of engaging with each other. So I think it's also an opportunity for all of us.
Mr. John, thank you so much for that. So I'm hoping we can have a pretty free-flowing discussion today. So while I will be directing questions to specific panelists, please feel free to chime in with your insights. Now, I wanted to kick off today's session with Dr. Destura. Right, I think we're pulling everyone up on screen. All right, nice to have everyone on screen with me. Dr. Destura, just starting off, there are a lot of projections being bandied about regarding the rate of infections, the effectiveness of different measures to mitigate them, and of course, the ever-present timeline to a vaccine, right? You touched on this during your opening statement, but could you start off by demystifying the situation a bit? How does this pandemic differ from those in the past, and where are we in our journey to beat COVID-19?
Well, there are two things in terms of the behavior of the pandemic. The major difference of coronavirus as opposed to the pandemics in the previous years is the level of preparedness of the healthcare force and the knowledge on how infection control preventions has evolved through the years, as opposed to years and years ago when we were having epidemics that the control of transmission is a little bit more challenging than what it is today. But the difference as well with coronavirus, despite of our more advanced healthcare system as opposed to centuries ago, the virus transmissibility is very, very high. And it's very, very challenging, principally because the way it infects everybody is very fast. Second, our population size has grown immensely so that the transmission of the virus is higher. So even if we have advanced healthcare system, if the number of cases outnumbers our capacity to absorb cases, it becomes a major problem. Hence the modelings. The modelings is there as a guide, actually. It's not an exact science, and it's always based on developing numbers of data. And that's why there are assumptions in certain percentages. But the purpose of the modeling is actually to give us an estimate on how much impact it's going to get at certain stages of our intervention. It will also allow us to determine whether the current intervention is going to help decrease the number of transmission rates or not. So each of these models has its own strengths and weaknesses. And it's actually not to be considered as biblical truths, but rather as guide on how we are in terms of making decisions for future activities related to the control of the virus. Epidemics will always happen. It is a known fact, regardless on the advances of society, principally because of human behavior and human encroachments. Some of these viruses are deeply hidden in our jungles and our forests and in those ecosystem of animals. But human encroachment has actually facilitated the transfer of viruses from animal to animal to human, and then human to human. So in terms of pandemics, there will always be a new version, whether more powerful than what's happening right now or less. But what's necessary is the ability for us to prepare for these particular problems that will arise again in the future. And it's still going to happen again. And pandemic preparedness is a very serious area that needs to be addressed on a national and a global level. And so these are the reasons why we shouldn't stop thinking about control of infectious disease until the end of the coronavirus problem. There will be other infectious disease emergencies that will happen in the future. And the only way to mitigate that is preparedness for those events, such as rapid diagnostic kit stockpiling, availability of drugs that can be easily be manufactured, and the like that are needed for controlling infectious disease, like personal protective equipment as an important and necessary mechanisms to do this by preparedness, infectious diseases stockpiling. Yeah.
Right, right. And I suppose it's very important to frame this, that viral outbreaks are part of the natural order of things, yes, but we definitely, as a species, we have a role to play. I mean, we play a role in these viral outbreaks and in causing them in some capacity. Yeah. Mr. Unjan, speaking of modeling, some estimates claim that the Philippine economy may lose between, I think it's 270 billion to 2.5 trillion pesos, depending on how this pandemic develops over the next few months. Could you give us a bit of a perspective on what that means for businesses, right? So perhaps the quantitative and qualitative impact that this might have.
Yes, I think these are numbers we haven't heard for a very long time. And I think it's true for the Philippines, but it's true as well across the world. If we just look at the first quarter of the year, we lost about 500 basis points of GDP. So going from the 6% last quarter to closer to 2%, less than 2%. And this was just in a quarter where we had like 2-3 weeks of quarantines, and of course a bit of the impact that was coming from China before. So you can imagine the magnitude of the change in terms of output impact for this coming quarter. And I think that's in line also with what we've seen in other markets. In a way, we are relatively in a better position, and I think it's good to acknowledge it. We're in a better position because we were on a higher growth trajectory than many markets, and secondly, because we have less debt. But I think the kind of number that you mentioned means that definitely we're talking about major adjustments in most industries, major adjustment in terms of demand, major adjustment in terms of indirect impact on the job creation and probably the kind of growth we have experienced. So I think it's really, when you want to look at it, you have to look at it almost industry by industry, with some of them having like absolute massive impact, like airlines, like probably travel and tourism, and some other hopefully that should be able to sustain a bit more activity, including retail, and hopefully including the BPO and other services. But we are talking about a very meaningful impact that will take probably a couple of years to recover.
Right. Dr. Corrado, I wanted to direct this next question to you. We've touched on the public health sector, so the public sector and various industries in the private sector now, with Mr. Unjan's comments. There are clearly a number of different sectors involved in ensuring we create a truly informed, effective response to COVID-19. As an expert in deliberative democracy, I was hoping you could expound on how we should be approaching these conversations, right? Who are the key stakeholders in the conversation around establishing this new normal?
Right. Well, first of all, deliberative democracy is a mouthful, but really what it means is it's a vision for a society that is sensitive to good reasons. And I know it sounds naive for some skeptics. Will politics and governance be ever about evidence and reason? Isn't politics about money, lying, propaganda, shutting down media giants? Oops. Well, no, politics doesn't have to be that way. I could give many examples of democratic innovations in local communities in the Philippines and in other countries where ordinary citizens are empowered to drive their own recovery. And that empowerment really comes from not just the private sector, as well as community organizers, NGOs, and civil society groups. So I've witnessed this in Tacloban after Typhoon Yolanda, which I've documented in my book, where there are a lot of opportunities for more collaborative policies. But for the context of the pandemic, though, I think what I wish to emphasize is the importance of listening to the reasons of communities that we don't often pay attention to. So one of the failures, I think, of our country's COVID-19 response is to listen to the reasons of the most vulnerable Filipinos. So if our COVID-19 policies, for example, were sensitive to reasons of vulnerable communities, we will not have a policy that says, stay at home, where staying at home for many means staying hungry for daily wage earners. It would have been different had the government said, we will pay for you to stay at home. Don't worry, we've got your back, and actually deliver on this promise. If we listen to the reasons of the poor, we will not have a policy that says, keep at least a meter distance. But what happens to families where it's literally impossible to keep distance? We are talking about a family of 8 living in a makeshift house the size of a box made of GI sheets and recycled tarpaulin, right? How is physical distancing possible there? We tell people to wash their hands. Great. But how is this doable in communities where water is rationed? So more than 20 million Filipinos live under these conditions. So I think a deliberative approach to the pandemic is sensitive to these reasons. Whoever is making these policies, whether it's government, the private sector, or civil society groups. I think it's good that the government tells us what's ideal, but we have to recognize that many Filipinos live in the least ideal of circumstances. So I think my suggestion here in terms of the stakeholders is to create a communication strategy that brings in rather than excludes the most vulnerable communities in the conversation. And it's only in this manner that we can have a legitimate and effective policy to COVID-19.
Responding to Dr. Krauta's points, Dr. Destura, in regards to the private sector specifically, Dr. Destura, what are our public health authorities currently doing right, and in what ways do you see it might improve? I think we might have a bit of a lag here. Dr. Destura, are you with us?
Well, currently, our public health authorities are focusing on the implementation of the. Yeah, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Please. Yeah, please. By all means, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay, sorry, my Wi-Fi has slowed down, I think. Our government is actually facilitating the enhanced testing protocols for the entire country. And the reason for that is for us to be able to identify active cases for immediate contact tracing and quarantine. The second is providing advisories to healthcare workers and healthcare institutions on how to respond to cases coming in. Third is currently undergoing reviews on how to develop a model or a tool that will provide better estimates on monitoring effects of the release of the ECQ. And that would include reviewing the role of serological testing and reviewing the role of exposed individuals to cases testing to be able to provide that particular number that will allow them to better monitor the impact of relaxing the ECQ. Right now, and I think majority of that is really hampered by, again, the pandemic because of delay in resources that are required to implement these projects and programs by the government, especially the Department of Health. Insofar as the academic community, our main role is really providing a scientific basis for certain decision makings that will provide tools for them to further have a better implementation guidelines on how to monitor the relaxing or to relax the ECQ being planned in the next couple of weeks.
Would love your perspective on this, SB. The government continues to look to the private sector to heavily support or even spearhead COVID-related initiatives, right? Whether it be through rapid testing, as Dr. Desura brought up earlier, or developing contact tracing tools, or simply shouldering in part the costs of our nation's response. What role do you see digitally empowering companies like yours playing to ensure the well-being of our workforce?
Yeah, I think I completely agree that it is absolutely essential for all of us to support this fight against COVID-19. And we truly appreciate the government efforts to contain the pandemic. We work closely with our regulator, for the BSP, and they have been extremely forthcoming in terms of seeing what is required to support the infrastructure from digital financial services. I think the battle against COVID-19 has a number of dimensions, Tiago, that go beyond just the testing and tracing. And I think those are equally important, and some of those are where we play a direct role. So first of all, just digital financial services by enabling customers, enterprises, government to go cashless and hence not physically interact, enables social distancing, enables people to continue to turn the wheels of the economy and ensure safety. So it helps to fundamentally control and hopefully help with the spread of pandemic by containing social contact and social distancing. I think the second key piece is, like I mentioned, during this time, it is extremely important for a large segment of the society to be able to access funds from the government who need the support because of all the issues, and Anthony alluded and you mentioned about the contraction in the economy, loss of wages and jobs. That role that we are playing with the government of dispersing the funds to the most challenged segments of the society, enabling them to get the funds into their wallet, working with, let's say, our remittance network, our Smart Padla network, which is about 30,000 Sari stores, is helping the most vulnerable part of the society to actually get access to financial aid, which helps their physical well-being and survival. And at the same time, it also helps to generate business for the Sari stores, who themselves at this point in period in time are facing a lot of challenge of survival and need all the help they can get. So one side is disbursement. The other side is, like we said, for the government to be able to support the society, it actually needs to collect money, right? So it has to be actually able to realize the taxes and the fees and the statutory payments that need to come to it. And we are enabling the government to do that. So we have enabled them to set up online. And today we work with over 30 government agencies to help them to collect money from people using their bank accounts and other digital means versus needing to go and stand in queue in a, let's say, a SSS outlet, where again, it's a health safety issue, but it's also an efficiency and at this stage, collection issue. So I think the digital financial services and that whole ecosystem, I think definitely is playing a role that goes beyond just the testing and other aspects, because I think these other aspects are frankly equally important for all of us to work together to try and contain the pandemic.
It's very heartening to see that see all of these collaborative efforts towards solving this shared crisis of ours. Dr. Curato, you began your opening session by saying the new normal is not really new, right? And you mentioned that your latest book explored the fallout of Typhoon Yolanda, stressing the need to develop tools to more deeply listen to those traumatized by crisis. I'm curious if you see any commonalities between the current pandemic and other crises that you've explored as a sociologist on the field. In his opening statement, Mr. Unjan pulled from history in outlining 2 stages following the pandemic. Speaking to our audience of business community leaders, what might we expect to follow this initial phase in the crisis?
Right. I think I will contradict myself at this point, initially saying that there's nothing really new about the pandemic, but actually there are quite stark differences, especially if we compare this pandemic to previous crises that the Philippines has experienced. So I've conducted extensive fieldwork in communities that have experienced mega disasters, armed conflict, and the drug war. And I think what's obvious to me is that communities in the Philippines have always been quarantined or segregated from each other. So we see this, for example, in the aftermath of a typhoon. Houses in gated communities can easily reconstruct or even renovate their homes, and then we can just look the other way and say, we're fine, let's move on. I don't think this logic can work in a pandemic, especially in a mega city like Manila. The virus does not choose between gated communities or the slums. And gated communities are reliant on the labor of people working in the slums. So the city will not function if our urban poor communities are not healthy. We can no longer look the other way. That's no longer an option. And I think that is what's different. We may experience COVID-19 differently, but we can no longer deny that our destinies are intertwined. And there's a strong case here for a vigorous commitment to the delivery of social welfare services, especially health, which we've taken for granted for a long time. And I think the responsibility here is both with employers and the government to take this commitment seriously. With the pandemic as the clearest example that we are only as good as our weakest link.
I think you framed that very, very brilliantly, Dr. Curato. SB, as someone at the helm of a company championing digital innovation, in what ways do you see businesses adjusting to the developing restrictions and shifting market factors amidst the pandemic? And if I might add to that, what opportunities do you see right now that businesses might be able to take advantage of?
Sure. And I'll keep it centered on specific examples that we are seeing right now. So first of all, I think from a consumer perspective, what we have seen is people who have never before used digital financial services, never before used delivery services, never before kind of ordered online, are beginning to use those services because that is frankly the only way that they can get about, whether it's getting groceries or food and the likes of that. So first of all, there's a consumer shift that has happened and it continues to happen in a significant way. I think the second thing that we are seeing is a lot of the small merchants, MSMEs, especially, for some of them it's survival, but for some of them they're seeing it as an opportunity when they're leveraging Viber groups, Facebook groups, or hyperlocal groups and hyperlocal delivery using the infrastructure that has sprouted up during this period. So the home delivery infrastructure has come up in a big way. And leveraging that to be able to go and serve audiences which otherwise needed for the customers to come to their location, whether it's a seafood seller, to now the seafood seller being able to send the goods to customers by using delivery services and being able to use get payments to their e-money wallets. So the opportunities in that segment are beginning to open up, and we're seeing a lot of that. We've seen in Makati Medical, for example, the doctors, they need to continue to provide consultation, but they can't do it physically anymore. It has to be teleconsult, video consult, but they need to be paid. So how do we set them up overnight as someone who can receive payments from the patients? So there are a number of these opportunities that are beginning to open up in the MSME space in particular. That's getting very interesting. I think customer behavior is changing, and that is helping. But there are huge sectors where we are seeing that the impact is cataclysmic, right? So travel, I think Anthony alluded to it. So we see our travel partners absolutely struggling at this stage. But overall, I think for the businesses, it is about stepping back and seeing, what can they do to realize the opportunity. And I'll give one small example, like a supermarket, right? One of our partners, we've seen with social distancing, there's only so many people you can allow into an outlet. But by accelerating home delivery, what they managed to do is expand their ability and footprint and the business that they can do. So I think everybody has to look for multiple channels of delivery, multiple channels of payments and getting paid in return for delivery of goods and services. So I think there are definitely pockets of opportunities that are out there, but not to take away from some significant challenges. The question is, how do we move and start realizing those opportunities as much as possible?
Right. Mr. Anjan, I'd love your perspective here as well. Any insights into consumer behavior moving into the new normal that businesses could best orient themselves to meet? Have you observed any notable best practices from among the private sector?
So first, to build on what SB was saying, there is a realization of the importance of our infrastructure and specifically a technology layer on top of our traditional infrastructure. Home delivery is becoming critical. The infrastructure for cashless exchange are becoming critical. Even the network, the phone network that we're all relying on for communication, even for this call, is really a strategic infrastructure. Additionally, I think there's been a realization on the public space of the importance of healthcare and at-scale healthcare system, and a healthcare system with a good control also of some key element of supply. And this shift, I think, will lead to a set of opportunities. And I think people will have extra attention to health. Maybe they will want more insurance, and this creates a set of opportunities. Now, in terms of consumer behavior, the main changes that we see at the moment are around the shift of activities from physical to at home. And we are not just talking about the work from home. We are talking also about entertainment from home, consume from home, communicate socially from home. And for now, it's by necessity. But what we see that a lot of people start to realize, actually, it's quite convenient, it works quite well, and some of this will stay. One of the fastest growing category at the moment is online gaming. Another fast category is the equipment for efficient work from home. And there will be, of course, as SB mentioned also, some major sustained shift toward digital services. For now, it's payment, but that will go to loan, that will go to credit, that will go maybe at some point to mortgage. I think that creates a lot of opportunities for enterprise and government, but in a very different way.
I want to take this opportunity to throw a question to the entire panel. At this point, I wanted to give you opportunity to close off your respective perspectives here. As you see it, what is the new normal that we're building towards, right? What roles do we all have to play in it? I would love to start with Dr. Dastura.
For the healthcare sector, the new normal will probably be the resurgence of telemedicine because of problems of social distancing. The need for digital technology as a tool for healthcare delivery is something that needs to be worked on. Having said that, the issue on internet speed and all of these things can be one of the limiting factors. And infectious disease emergencies will always happen in the future. And the take home point that I would like to stress is that nothing beats a well-prepared country. So, in anticipations for future epidemics, by preparedness that responds is something that needs to be taken seriously, and it requires multi-sectoral involvement, both the government and the private sector, because pandemics and epidemics of this magnitude cannot be handled by a single society, single sector of society, but must be a collaborative effort in both the private and the private sector, the government and the private sector.
Thank you for that, Dr. Destura. Dr. Kurata, same question. As you see it, what is the new normal that we're building towards?
Well, we've been hearing a lot about the importance of collaboration and innovation in the age of the new normal, and I think that's wonderful. But I think we have to be very careful in using these words without putting the most vulnerable communities at the center of this discussion. I mean, even Singapore, which was once considered the global trailblazer in the fight against COVID-19, had to address the problems with migrant workers' dormitories, because you cannot respond to the pandemic without putting the most vulnerable communities at the center of the policy. We hear a lot of innovations with tech and digitalization of labor, fantastic. But as one of the commenters in this Facebook page mentioned, does this also mean losing jobs, right? So I think the best way to move forward from this pandemic is to just not have an exclusive conversation about opportunities available just for government, just for business, but putting the most vulnerable communities at the center of this conversation. This virus will not go away without putting that at the core of what our policies in our future will look like.
SB, would love to get your perspective here. What roles do we all have to play in this new normal?
Sure. So I think a little bit building on the point that Dr. Nicole made, I think we've spoken about how there'll be significant contractions and issues. I think one of the big ways for us to counter that is to make sure that we expand our financial inclusion in the Philippines. Our current situation of financial inclusion is very, very poor in the Philippines by any benchmark whatsoever. By accelerating financial inclusion and making sure a larger and larger part of the society has access to payments, access to credit, access to insurance, access to all kinds of other services, will have a big impact in helping us to include a large segment of the society that is today very vulnerable, but also overall help the larger country. The documentation of the benefits of a financially inclusive country and economy are very well known. And I think that's the time now that we need to do that. For that, we have to create some of the infrastructure and accelerate some of that which is happening. So things like the national ID that is being progressed, and a number of other measures that need to be put in place. So to me, it is really about, this is a time we really need to accelerate the financial inclusion across the country, because that to me will be one of the key factors that can help in the overall lift and to help to cushion some of the negative impacts that we will see over the coming months.
And Mr. Ranjan, please.
Yes, I also see this crisis as a wake-up call for all of us. And I think if you look at the genesis and the speed of the spread of this virus, you can see it as a manifestation of a limit of a model where we were. I mean, we've been on 10 years of fast growth, reckless expansion. And I'm hoping and I believe that this event is an opportunity to step back and realign our model to something which is much more inclusive, with something that is much more sustainable for the planet, but also for communities, and something that really give like the fair share to everyone in the community. I fully agree with the panelists that this is an opportunity to rethink and realign the model.
Fantastic. I think now we'd like to invite members of our online audience to start sharing their questions. I know they have been already through Facebook. So I think we have time for about 3 to 5 questions. I'm going to be pulling them from the comments here. So this one comes from Melissa Velez. What are your thoughts on the impending ECQ deadline? Can Metro Manila begin easing out of an ECQ after May 15? Anyone from the panel, if you guys have any insights here? Are we ready for the end of ECQ?
It's a dichotomous answer, and it's a double-edged sword. Relaxing the ECQ runs the risk of resurgence of the disease, increasing again the peak of the curve. But the other side of the story is, if it's not being relaxed, it will be also will have heavy effects on the economy of the country, especially those that are receives income by the day. So it's easier said than done in terms of implementing the relaxations of the ECQ. For as long as the monitors are in place and capacity to absorb are well prepared before the relaxation of the ECQ, it's going to be a very challenging post ECQ environment. I can just hope that people maintain social distancing just to make sure that the significant effect of the relaxation of the ECQ will be not that big in terms of resurgence.
Any other insights from our other panelists here? Is our country ready for the relaxation of the ECQ? Or perhaps from another perspective, do we need to relax the ECQ ASAP?
So maybe I'll start on this. I don't think we can go overnight to live out the life that we are living in February, but I think there are a set of things that we can do to move towards resuming some level of activities in a very safe way. And I think the government and all the bodies are looking closely at maintaining the right balance. I think we really want this virus to stay under control. We really want to monitor the key element of that, but at the same time, resuming activity will be important for bringing back some economic development and some revenues for many people. So it's going to be very progressive, very de-averaged, and I think we'll have to monitor and sometimes go forward, go backward as needed.
I think the only point I'll add is I think all of us at our own organizations need to look at, is an extended period of work from home something, if that's a sustainable part of your model, if you can continue to do that so that you can take as much pressure off the infrastructure as it tries to get back, whether it's the transportation infrastructure or whether it is the other aspects, then, whatever we can do to support. So we are doing the same. We are looking at our processes and saying, if the ECQ is lifted on May 15th, what does that mean? It shouldn't mean that we all need to rush to office because that is going to put a lot of load on the infrastructure. If we are able to operate and work from home effectively and deliver on our goods and services, then let us continue to do that for a period of time and then gently ease our way in as the infrastructure also gets used to the new way of operating. So I think that's something that we all need to think hard about and support.
I think the only point I'd like to add to this conversation is it's very context sensitive. So for example, the view here in Australia is that schools can go back because children don't get COVID-19 compared to other people. Work from home arrangements continue. So I think rather than just saying, is May 19 a good time to lift the ECQ, the question is how prepared are our different industries in putting processes in place so health and safety will be the primary priority when people go back to work. It's a question of preparedness rather than just a question of is it an arbitrary date? It's a date that our medical professionals should determine. It's a date that experts should determine, but it's also a conversation that the public should have input. There are many competing interests here. So one of the issues in Australia, for example, is because there was a prioritization of COVID-19 cases, there is a worry that there's a rise in cases of cancer because cancer screening was not prioritized. So maybe thinking about the post-May 19 Philippines, we have to start thinking about competing priorities with COVID-19 and how we can make those priorities aligned rather than competing.
Right. So this is a question that comes for the entire panel coming from Mr. Thakur. And perhaps we can end on this as well. Beyond just the government recommendations, how can businesses support their employees fully during this slow recovery period that we're all facing?
So I can start.
Yeah, go
Maybe
ahead.
go ahead, Nicole. Go ahead.
Yeah, since I'm the one who's not involved in any business at all, I think my silver lining, blue skies thinking here is that I would really like to see businesses who can, because I know not all businesses can, but for businesses who can, to shift from philanthropy to minimum wage or a living wage. We've been celebrating a lot of businesses because of their good charitable work because of the pandemic. Fantastic. But I think the even bigger issue here is, why are we even having to get to the point of talking about charity if we can give our employees excellent healthcare, excellent insurance, and excellent support that is built in their working contracts? So this is my blue skies thinking. I know that not all companies can afford this, but for companies that can, I hope this pandemic will be an opportunity to reassess what kinds of rights they give to their workers. So when something like a pandemic happens again, we don't have to rely on charity. There is justice and dignity in good labor.
Yeah, just to build on that, I think some companies have demonstrated that kind of commitment, at least in the early days, by, giving the full salary. I mean, 20 plus companies did that by paying upfront the bonus from the end of the year. But what we've seen as the crisis extended is that you have less and less companies who are in position to do that. And especially in the smaller and medium enterprises, most companies have 3 or less months of cash, or 3 or less months, to sustain their business, and they have to go in a different ways. And I think the best ways for them to continue to sustain is to be able to bring back a level of activity, and we want them to do it safely. So anything they can do to maximize the continuity of the business through developing quickly online channels, selling through the various existing platforms, empowering their employees to work from home, or if they cannot work from the home, enabling a very safe environment will eventually be a more structural solution, because the solution of just throwing money is going to be something that's going to be hard to sustain for a very long time.
Yeah, I would add a couple of things. I think the way we've been thinking about this, I think first of all, what we are realizing that is there are not a lot of young employees that we have who are staying alone. And during this period, it's been very socially isolating for them. When you're caught up in an apartment and you have absolutely no access to anyone or any person in a physical scenario. And I think the way this COVID will play back, I think it will be a little bit of an ebb and flow. So I don't think it's come May 15th and we declare victory. So I think what we have been working on is, and we're realizing that the response to us setting up things like mental well-being and helplines for our employees to access, us doing seminars with psychologists and trained professionals on just mental well-being and issues like that to address, because work from home is not a norm for most of us. So this is an artificial environment that's compounded with no social activity at all, no personal contact. So I think one part is that, and I think even if we have to continue to make this a viable option, which I think we may need to, the work from home. So it's really like recognizing that there is a mental well-being aspect that organizations and people need to be aware of. I think the second piece is it does, on the other side, bring in flexibility. It does bring flexibility of people who may not be located in the city where you operate, but live in other cities who, as we're realizing, work from home is quite a feasible option. It can generate opportunities for specialized skilled people who may not be, let's say, in Metro NCR, but live in Davao, but find limited opportunities in Davao. But now with work from home, it may open up opportunities for people with specialized skill to continue to be in their location, but continue to now get employed in other parts of the country. So I think that could open up some of the opportunities as we look at the work from home arrangement as a viable working option going forward. But I think the third piece really is in terms of us trying to minimize the impact as much as possible, and where possible, looking at what are some shared changes that we can do, whether it's on compensation structures, on benefits, which can help ameliorate the pain for the organization, because there is a challenge definitely on cost that most of us are facing.
Right. Dr. Desura, do you have anything to add there?
Well, the thing that will be affected as well in terms of the new normal is the new normal for healthcare delivery. This is one of those population sets that requires human interaction. And for this particular scenario, we will have problems related to the number of healthcare workers who can actually continually do their work in this particular aspect, or the number of healthcare workers that may become vulnerable to the situation. So the economy of scale in delivering healthcare will be severely affected by this program, by this epidemic, simply because you need the human resource to address something that's very difficult to do in a work from home environment. So there are innovative ideas on how to make this happen. It's an open canvas for everybody. And I'm really hoping that scientific research, academic, and, and the private sectors can provide significant inputs on how to improve healthcare delivery with significantly reducing the risk of transmission to the contacts.
Dr. Desura, all right. I think that's a fantastic place to close today's discussion. Thank you very much. And a big thank you to our fantastic speakers, Dr. Desura, Dr. Curato, SB, Mr. Unjan. And of course, thank you as well to our audience. With that, I'd like to close today's session. We hope to see all of you next week, May 13 at 11 a.m. For the third leg of Business World Insights, where we'll be discussing the uncertainties and opportunities of COVID-19 and the Philippine stock market. To our panelists, again, thank you for joining us. And to our audience, stay safe and have a great afternoon.